want to welcome you to the root cause analysis training. This is the next aspect of the targeting assistance work that we'll be doing with our partners from CDE. Of course, you know us, we're the Equity, Disproportionality, and Design team out here in South San Diego. Our grant is, okay, let's skip that one.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Our grant is funded by the California Department of Education in partnership with California Collaborative for Educational Excellence. Thank you, Lynn. And of course, we have our team. As you all know, if you may not know, our Ryan is no longer, he's moved on to his next educational journey, but we do have our new team member, Jennifer Toll, who's with us. Of course, we're led by Russell Coronado, Executive Director, Adrian Bautista, our Program Clerk, Dr. Aaron Mahoney, and I am Marcus Jackson. Then you have our FUMTA units from CDE, led by Donna DiMartini from Unit 2. And then for Unit 3, we have the team led by James Johnson. As always, we'd like to go over our community agreements. First and foremost, we want you to be able to take care of your personal needs. Always assume the best intentions of other participants. We want you to ask what you need to know to understand and contribute. We want to make sure it's always a collaborative learning environment. We encourage you to have your camera on and also participate by going off mute or using the chat throughout the exercise. We'd like to start with an icebreaker warm-up activity. So what we'd like you guys to do is, we know you're either coming back, starting off your school year. We want you to think about what you're looking for, one of your hopes that you're looking forward to this school year. So go ahead and put in the chat, what are you hoping to get with your team this year within your LEA? Something that you're hoping for. I know there's a lot of teams that are new, starting out. Okay, let me see that coming in. All right. Summer Thomas. Okay, so you can put it in the chat if you, okay, consistency, all right? It's a good one out there. Things being consistent, improve, purposeful systems. I like that, great. Increased parent facilitated IEP meetings. All right, it's good to have that collaboration with that. Any more in there, out there? Once again, consistency of the team. Good, it's always good to have that consistency. Everyone on the same page. Any more out there? Okay, feel free, you can always put that in a little later if you do have more. At this time, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Lynn Boone as she presents the presentation of root cause analysis today. Lynn, it's all yours.
Thanks, Marcus. Welcome, everybody. I'm really happy that you could make it here today. I want to give you an apology early because I have a bad cold. So I'm going to be trying not to cough through this presentation. I will say, this is a lot of information I'm giving you. It's sort of a cross between a lecture and a public service announcement. So if you're not understanding, you need better clarification, feel free to go off mute and ask a question. Or if you are more comfortable, you can put it in the chat and we will respond to it at the end when there will be plenty of time for questions. But there's a lot of information, and that we know that is not the best learning style. So what we're hoping is that you will be able to take advantage of some of the opportunities that we'll offer to connect with us outside of this webinar. So we know that it's very possible that you could be listening to this and you go back to your data work and you don't know where to start. So I want to just really invite you early on to connect with your FMTA consultant or to connect with ED&D and set up a coaching session. By all means, we want to help you through this process, and we know it is not an easy process. So let's talk about the agenda, what you can expect today. We're in the introduction right now. I'm going to take a little bit of time to talk about where we are and where we are going in the SIM process. Just want to make sure that you know how things fit together a little bit. It's really important that things come together at this point prior to going into root cause analysis. So hopefully that will help clarify for some of you. Also, we're going to be talking about what do you need to do to prepare for the root cause analysis. One of the things with Stepwell that we've noticed is that there's still some work that might need to be done in terms of being prepared for the root cause analysis. And we want you to have the most successful root cause analysis, because that's the basis of a strong plan that will make a difference for kids and move the indicator. So we'll talk about a little bit about that. We'll talk about using data-driven cycles of inquiry and what that is and how that works and what that's for. We'll talk about developing problem statements and developing and validating cause statements and how that moves you towards your root cause. And then we'll talk about the actual identification of the root cause. And then we're going to talk a little bit about reducing the impact of roadblocks. And of course, there'll be time for questions, plenty of time for questions at the end. Hopefully, we'll be able to let you loose a little bit early today. So some of the challenges we will be discussing, and I just want to introduce them to you here because they really impact everything. They might have been things that have come up for you already. We'll talk in more detail at the end, but I want you to just be aware of them. One is scale. So what scale means is scale in data is when you have information that is a very small scale, like maybe you got a really good parent empathy interview, and that's something that you feel like is something to hang on to. What do you do with that? That's just one person. That's you want to make sure that this is not something that's based on one person's ideas, but really something that's going on systematically in your school. So what do you do with that when you have that kind of situation? We'll talk about the difference between correlation and causation. When you're looking for a root cause, you want to make sure that it is the cause of your problem, not the cause of something else, or not just a correlation, something that exists at the same time as. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then talking about avoiding roadblocks like solutionitis or confirmation bias, which are both ways that just it's a mindset that can kind of twist how you're looking at data and negatively impact what your ability to see what's there. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But we'll be going into much more detail about that at the end. But I will be referring some throughout about these particular issues that can impact your root cause analysis. So before we fully launch in, I want to just take a minute to talk about our why. I feel like that if I asked anyone on this webinar or really throughout education, I think that everybody would agree that we all want what's best for our students. We want to see them successful, and we want to do the thing that's going to make a difference for them. And so what is this about root cause analysis? Well, root cause analysis, and why root cause analysis is as opposed to any other approach to supporting a plan. Root cause analysis that is driven by data. In other words, you get the root cause from looking at the data, not by coming up with a solution yourself. Because if I gave you anything, I could say, what do you think the cause of this is? And anybody who has more than 15 minutes of experience in education would have an opinion about that. That's something that we do in our field is learn how to make connections to things. But this process is totally different. We want to really only see it in the data. And so By doing that, you have the opportunity to find and address core issues that are impacting the education of a particular group of students, some of which are historically underserved and disenfranchised. So it's really, really important that we get to the real thing, not to an idea that somebody has. And so we're going to be talking about that, but that's why root cause analysis, and that's why we're spending so much time on this. So let's take a minute to look at where are we now. You did a lot of things last year. You're in a new school year. Some of you might even be new in your positions, who this is your first webinar that you've done with the SIM process. Last year, we really worked on step one, gather and inquire. And that was the first step to find out where are we. That's our guiding question. And what we did is we attended webinars. We had a data drill down webinar. We went to webinars similar to this that were focused on the step one activities. Those of you in an LEA selected a team to participate in the SIM process, and you decided who the members are, and you prepared that team. Perhaps you used the SIM team rubric to, and maybe the resources that came with that to prepare and strengthen your SIM team. We're going to be talking a little bit about that today. You completed the data drill activities number 1 and number 2, which was really the launch of your data drill down activities. That was the beginning of your own data analysis about this disproportionality indicator that you're addressing. You completed the policies, practices, and procedures review in SECMAS. That was what you submitted June 30th. And you have just yesterday received corrective actions, or that you didn't have any non-compliances. You continued data drill downs because even when you were finished with the data drill down activity number 2, you probably weren't done looking at data. You want to keep looking at the what, the who, about, and the where about your problem. You really want to understand what does that situation of the disproportionality indicator, what does that look like in your LEA? So I don't know anybody who was finished at the point that they were finished with the activity number 2. And so if you haven't continued, you will continue so that you get a really clear idea, a more full idea of your problem. You also gathered additional data. And one thing is from the policies, practices, and procedures review. Now that was looking at specific IEPs based on specific protocols, which related to your disproportionality element or indicator. And as you looked at your IEPs and you looked at your policies and procedures, you were guided in that in terms of did you find compliance or non-compliance, or was it not applicable? But just the process of looking at a bunch of IEPs over and over again can bring to you things that you notice that might be a pattern. You may have noticed it because there was a non-compliance, but you might have noticed it that something that wasn't even asked on the SECMAS review. So whatever you got from your policies, practices, and procedures review, that might be something that you continue to research. It's kind of like you saw the tip of the iceberg. Now you've got to look at other things to see if that's something to consider. And parent input. And I know this was very confusing last year, and it continued to be in the StepWell submission that you just recently submitted. So I want to explain, hopefully this will help clarify. Parent input itself is required. Now, it doesn't matter whether that's an empathy interview, that could be a survey, that could be a focus group. The format of the input is not dictated. And the training for the parent input was not required. If you did the training, ED&D did a great job teaching about empathy interviews and how to use them. If you followed all the way through with that, then you did parent input. If you did not, then you had to have some other kind of parent input. And parent input is supposed to help you understand your problem better. So for example, if I'm looking at, white autism is my area that I need to address. And I find that a lot of those IEPs were, or the assessments for those IEPs came from a parent recommendation. Well, I might take my parent input and ask, what brought that up? Why did they do that instead of the SST process? Did they know about the SST process? Do they know about 504 plans? Finding out what was that thinking at that time to make sure that I understand that. And that's, for example, I could use parent input to better understand my problem that way. So try to do your parent input in a way that helps you understand your problem better. Okay, and so where we are now, you just recently completed the August 1st Stepwell submission, and that was information about step 1 work. That included a summary of your data drill down work. And the idea was that your data drill down work would have been coming to fruition, where you actually were very clear about your problem. It's possible that your consultant might send it back if you were only initially addressing what it is that you need to do for that data drill down, so that you have an opportunity to complete it. Discoveries from collecting parent input. A lot of people did not put anything into that parent input. So again, you want to use that parent input to help you understand your problem. And information from policies, practices, and procedures review. That was really about, what did you find in that process? What did you learn? What did you discover? And what more investigation do you need based on what you did see in that review? Now, a lot of people didn't do the infrastructure assessment or the ed benefit review. Those two were optional, so don't worry if you didn't do it. But if you did, then we would like you to put what you found in there, so that we can see what additional information you have. Where we are right now is step 2. As of August 1st, we entered into step 2, investigate. And that goes all the way till September 30th, 2022. At which point you'll have another Stepwell submission where you're going to give us your root causes, and if you have more than one, you're going to put them in priority order. So your first root cause would be listed first, and your second root cause would be listed second. But because this is disproportionality this year, chances are really good that you only have 1 or 2 root causes. So don't feel that you have to have multiple root causes. In fact, the fewer you have, the better it is. But by the end of September, you will need to be able to list that and describe those root causes to us. So that's our goal, is September 30th. We're ready for that. And just to look a little farther down, the final SIM plan, not the implementation, but the final SIM plan is due November 1st, 2022. And this question came up in the last webinar. We are looking at what additional information you need to prepare that. So don't worry that, right, currently root cause analysis looks like the last webinar. There will be more information to follow. So what is a root cause? What are we talking about? Well, Paul Preuss wrote the School Leader's Guide to Root Cause Analysis. And in education, it's his definition we tend to use. And he stated, a root cause is the deepest underlying cause or causes of positive or negative symptoms within any process that, if dissolved, would result in elimination or substantial reduction of the symptom. So I want to point out a few things. First off, it's the underlying cause. It's not the superficial cause. Sometimes there's a cause underneath the cause underneath the cause. And so the root cause is the bigger one, right? It has more impact. And I also want to point out that this is positive or negative symptoms. If you had a leap on test scores for math, you could do a root cause analysis to find out what was the cause of that leap so you could repeat it. The root cause analysis doesn't have an opinion about positive or negative. It's just looking at what is connected. So you are able to use it for repeating something positive or to identifying what might be a problem or a situation that you want to address. And this other part of his quote is particularly important to where we are now, especially if you're doing a root cause analysis all the way to its depth, then you're going to find the situation. He says we have to concentrate on dissolving the root rather than fixing the symptom with a patch. Educators were really good at patching things. And the problem is that patch, it makes it harder sometimes to find the actual cause. So continuing, once the root is dissolved, the symptom will go away of its own accord. Patches just add complexity and cost to the system. So if you're looking through this and it's difficult, it's very possible that what some of the things you're looking at is results of a patch. Because when you patch something and you don't fix it all the way, sometimes the system will create a different issue. So when things are very complicated, often it's something that's been patched many times, and you have to kind of get past all that to get to the root cause. It can make it more difficult to find the root cause. So be aware of that in your process. So I want to take a step back and look at the overview before we go into some steps about how to proceed. So root cause analysis is a process. It's not exactly a step-by-step plan that you can follow. So it's like getting ready for a road trip. There's all kinds of stuff you have to do. Some things it's important that you do before you do others. For example, it's a good idea to pack your suitcases before you put them in the car. But it doesn't matter whether you get gas, right? Or unless you have an electric vehicle, but it doesn't matter whether you get gas before you get on the road or the day before. So some things it matters the order and some things it doesn't. And in some ways that makes it a little bit more difficult to know where you are. So I will say root cause analysis actually follows its own organic process. You won't find very many steps to root cause analysis when you're doing research because it's different every time. But what is the same is, first of all, you identify a problem. To some degree, if something's wrong, it's kind of intuitive that you identify what it is. And so you look at that. Or if something's really good, you identify what is really good. What is it that's working? And when you're looking at that, you start to ask why the problem existed. Like, what were the circumstances? How did this happen? Why is this happening? And probably organically, you're going to look for to make sure that the reasons that you found for why that they're true and accurate. If you're not sure, you're probably going to do some research or think about it more. But you want to make sure that the reason that you've identified is a real reason and actually connects to whatever you're looking at. And you're going to want to look at all the causes, but you're going to want to actually focus on the ones that have the biggest impact. And that's probably intuitively what you might do to approach. Well, the SIM process focuses on that. First, you're going to write a problem statement, and we'll talk about how do you write a problem statement and what that is. But basically, it's identifying your problem through data. It's discussing, it's stating the problem. And then you're going to write some cause statements based on what you've discovered the causes are through your data. And cause statements are just a way to kind of capture what you're seeing with data. And then you're going to make sure that those cause statements, you're going to validate them. You're going to make sure that they're true and real and substantial. And from those cause statements that you validated, you're going to identify which ones are the ones to spend your time on, the biggest cause. You're going to want to identify that because that's the one you're going to want to put the most energy into. So what do we need to prepare for the road ahead? Well, you're going to go way back. And if you haven't already done this, you're going to want to prepare the SIM team, because this is the part of the data analysis, the process where things can get difficult. And you know that you're going to be going through this difficult part of data analysis, and you're going to want to go all the way through to planning, and you're going to want to go all the way through to implementation, and you want that to go smoothly. So your goal is to have a functioning team that has the capacity to take the work all the way through the SIM process, including the planning and implementation stages. You're going to want to complete the analysis of data to the point of fully understanding the problem or problems. You want to understand in every way you can look at it what the problem is. Not if you ask someone and they tell you, but from actual data where you can see, no, this is occurring here in this way. And your goal is to identify the problem. There might be more than one problem or problems from the view of the LEA. In other words, not from the CDE view about what your indicator is, but what does it look like, boots on the ground? What does it look like in the classroom or in the meetings? What is there? What's happening there that relates to the issue that you're addressing? And you want to fully understand the problem with the details of the data. And in a way, it should be that if you present the details, in other words, in a data form, then it describes what the situation is, and you don't need a lot of extra explanation. So when you're preparing for the SIM team, you want to make sure that you have decision-making authority, either because you have somebody who is a decision maker on your team, which is preferential because then they get to participate in all of the understanding of the data that goes into the root cause so that they see really the details of the problem. That's ideal. But if you don't have that, you need to make sure that you have some way of getting the people who make decisions about spending resources such as time, who is it that sets the agenda for the faculty meetings, for example. You don't want to be in a situation of one of my LEAs way back in PIR early on. The LEA did not have a decision maker on their SIM team. They created a pretty good plan and they presented it to the superintendent. The superintendent was relatively new at that district. And he was not interested in their plan. He had his own plans about what he was going to do. And so he said no. And that was a big challenge for them at that point, at a very difficult time. So I don't want to see that happen to you. So make sure that you are getting that early on. And then general education knowledge and buy-in. All indicators, everything in special education benefits from the understanding and perspective of general education educators. But in this case in particular, when you're working with disproportionality, the majority of disproportionality happens prior to the student being ever in special education. So it's not really a special education resolvable problem. It's something that you have to have the buy-in and the understanding from general educators. And once you have the right people on your team, or you have a way to make sure that you're connected with those people, then you really want to foster some mindsets. And there's resources that we passed out, that we emailed you last year, but it also is on a Padlet that we're going to give you the link to so that you can more easily access this. But you want to foster an open mindset of curiosity. That's something that really you want to be able to, I wonder why that is, and ask the next question that'll help you continue. And you need that objectivity so that you have, you're looking at like a scientist. You're not looking at it as a parent or as a teacher or as an administrator. You're looking at it sort of with new eyes, sort of a little bit distant. So that allows you to see more, see what's there. And then patience and determination, which if I could give you anything, I would give you heaps of patience and determination, because you're going to need that determination to go on when you come up with to a roadblock and you have to start again. And you're going to need the patience to work through data issues to get those questions answered. And so that sort of perseverance is what you need your sim team to have. You can use the sim team rubrics and the resources to learn more about this, or you could contact us or ED&D to help. So here we are at the start line of our root cause analysis. And the starting line actually begins by identifying the problems. And I don't mean the kind of identification that you might do just sitting here without thinking. I mean the kind of identification that comes from data review. And so you're going to work on problem statements. And problem statements, it's just a short statement. It's 1 to 3 sentences, and it describes the problem as it has been revealed through data analysis. So you looked at all these things, you've done this data drill down, you got to maybe to specific grades. Then you looked at it in other ways to try to understand what the differences are with your targeted group and the non-targeted group. You tried to understand maybe what happened before or what happened after or what the context was. And you've looked at it every which way. Now you want to identify what you think the problem, and sometimes this is easier if you don't think of it as a problem, but you just think of it as a situation. What is that statement of that situation using the pertinent data? And remember, not all data actually tells you about your situation. It might help you to have gotten to your situation, but you want to really focus on that pertinent data. And by stating that data, whatever it is you found, it should help you see what the situation is that you're going to want to address. If there is more than one problem, you want to make sure that there is a problem statement for each problem that you have, but double check that you don't have 2 problem statements for one problem. You might end up with a couple of problem statements that you need to combine, because it is much easier to when you don't have too many problem statements. So you want to really focus on making sure these are the problems and they're distinct. So let's talk about what the qualities of a strong problem statement are. You want to make sure that they're clearly connected to the area of concern. This year, that's easy. Every year is working on a disproportionality indicator. And so whatever that indicator, whatever it says you're out in, then the problem statement connects to that. You want to make sure that it's data informed. So the details you're given clearly come from the analysis of the data. In fact, the more you have the data do the talking, the better that it is. You want to make sure that it's objective. It's stated without blame or judgment. It's just a situation. You want to make sure it's student-centered. So the problem statement needs to come from the perspective of serving students. So it doesn't ignore them, and it doesn't blame them. It comes from the perspective that students need our support. And there's LEA ownership. So by LEA, I mean it is at the level of where the situation is occurring. If the situation isn't occurring in the district office, then it needs to be at the level wherever that is. If it's fourth grade, then it's fourth grade. If it's the 3 elementary schools, then it's the 3 elementary schools. Your data is what tells you where it is. And you need to make sure that your problem statement is there where that situation is. And by ownership, it's not about blame. It's just about taking responsibility for addressing it. And I like to use example of a former colleague of mine who worked a lot with, it was at a high school, and she worked a lot with migrant students. We had a very high migrant population in Castroville. And she kept a closet of clothes, and everybody knew that they could give her their hand-me-downs or things that our children grew out of, and she always would take them. And the kids knew that if they needed a clean shirt, or they maybe were going to an interview, they could look for something in there. And I had other colleagues that said, Mary Lou, that's a lot. It's not your responsibility to clothe all the kids. And her response was always just that, she saw that her kids didn't always have clean clothes, and they didn't always have clothes to go interview in. And so she saw a problem, and she just wanted to help. And that's the perspective that we want to try to take. We just want to find out how we can help. Soon, got the problem statement done. So remember, that first step is to identify problem. And those are all the who, what, where questions, probably. And until you have all of those questions answered, you're probably not ready to go forward. You want to keep looking at who, what, where, and when. Then you want to, once you're running out of those who, what, when, and you start to ask why, you are starting to look at where that problem exists, why that problem exists, and you're starting to look at the beginning of unearthing causes. And unearthing causes, it isn't like asking your, your whoever you work with in your office or in down the hall in the classroom what they think the causes are. They'll just tell you what they think the causes are. This is looking bit by bit by data and starting to find a relationship that you can that you can claim, that you can state. So how is it that we get from writing the problem statement to finding causes without just starting to put our opinions in? Well, you need the right vehicle. And there is a tool that can take you from identifying the problem to finding causes. And it's called data-driven cycles of inquiry. Now, the good news is it's very similar, if not the same, what you have done with the data drill down already. And it is not difficult to do. So what is it? Well, it's a cycle. You start with reviewing data. When you're looking at data, you start to make observations. You look for patterns, you look for, whatever you see. And out of that, then comes curiosity, and you ask more questions. You ask some questions about that. Maybe you can find it in that original data source. Maybe you have to go look someplace else. But you're looking for data to answer those questions. And so you obtain more data to answer those questions. And you get those questions answered, but now you're looking at new data, and you're looking at the data you already had. And you might go back and forth between asking some basic questions, but at some point you're going to start asking deeper questions about these data sources that you have. And that's going to require you to gather data to answer the deeper questions. And sometimes you have to go out and find that data, like do empathy interviews to find out, why did parents pick our school? Why did parents of a certain subgroup pick our school over another subgroup where there's a lot fewer of those that picked our school? You have to go and ask that. You may not have that data readily available. And then that cycles around to reviewing that data, making observations, and around again. And so I hear you thinking, that's just going around and around and around. Well, yes, but there is a bigger picture. When you're doing multiple cycles of inquiry and you stick to the inquiry, you don't jump to solving things, you don't jump to your own opinion about things, you're sticking to the data, then you will go from understanding the problem. And at a certain point, you understand the problem so well that there's not really more to understand about the problem. And you automatically start delving into why. And in fact, probably that's not as delineated as it sounds, right? You start delving into why the problem exists, probably even before you fully understand the problem. And then you start to unearth causes. And that happens because you're delving into why the problem exists. And you probably are still trying to understand the problem more and more. But you start to move into unearthing the causes. And before you know it, you have causes that you are now looking to validate. And so you are going forward, even though it seems like you're staying in the same place, because naturally you are compelled to look for more things because your questions get answered. You don't ask the same questions over and over again. But what if you're at a point where you don't really know what to do? I mean, it's possible. It happens where it's like, well, okay, I know my problem. I don't really know where to start. So one thing is to look for relationships and comparisons. Relationships between things and comparisons between things. Both are a good way to start looking toward why. It's not necessarily going to give you the why, but it's going to get you into sort of the right lane, so to speak. For example, did all of these African-American students that were identified as OHI get suspended multiple times in 8th grade? How many of the African-American students that were not identified as OHI got suspended? Okay, so I'm going to look at that information. I start to see a pattern as I was looking at looking for what the problem is. And then I start to look at, well, what happened to the other groups? And I start to compare, and I start to see differences and similarities, which start telling me where else to look. And by doing those relationships and comparisons, I sort of move myself into another category. At a certain point, you continue asking questions and those potential causes start to be uncovered. It can become difficult to continue asking questions. You start to see the data and it seems like it's already telling you something. And it almost seems absurd to ask another question. So what do you do then? Well, you start to work with something that's called hypothesis question. And basically, an hypothesis question is, it's a statement turned into a question. So in science, you develop a hypothesis, and your hypothesis is a statement of what you expect to see when you do a certain experiment. And then you do the experiment to see whether or not your hypothesis was right. Well, we're not going to do an experiment, but once you start to see something emerge and you create a hypothesis out of that, you can turn that back into a question. And then it can be answered by data instead of an experiment of some type. So for example, let's give you a scenario, a context. Students who are African American at ZUSD are 5.75 times more likely to be identified as ED than others. So ZUSD SIM team looked at data. They looked at the who, the where, and the when, and they started to see things emerge, and they looked at that more, and they've developed from all that data, they've developed a problem statement. Prior to the request for assessment for special education, 91% of African American students who have been identified under the category of ED have been subject to disciplinary actions that resulted in missing class at an average rate of 6 times per week without any significant consistent behavior support. So this particular group, this particular SIM team found information from identification, the students who were identified as ED who were also African American, and what the disciplinary situation was for them, what happened there, how often they missed class, and what the consistent behavior support was. And they were able, through that data, to actually make this problem statement. Now the SIM team is looking for the causes, and they have found some patterns within academic performance and discipline data. So when they're looking for causes, remember, they're looking at relationships, they're looking at comparisons, they're trying to look to find what is different, what is standing out. And so they are seeing some patterns in academic performance data and discipline data. So the hypothesis, if they were to write it down, African American students who are struggling in any subject, as indicated by their does not meet standards grades, you have to define what you consider struggling in a subject is so that you can quantify it. They're more likely to be the focus of disciplinary action during that class or block and all other classes held after that class. So that's their hypothesis. They don't necessarily know that to be true, but that's something that they think they're seeing. And so how they investigate that, how they know where to go with that, is they turn that into a question, and maybe that leads to additional questions. The question might be, were African American students within the qualifying category of ED who were struggling in a subject, as indicated by does not meet standards grades, more likely to be subject to disciplinary action in that particular class block and any other class after that? By putting that into question form, they know exactly what answer they need and where they need to look for the data. It becomes really clear where what the next step would be. And so let's say they look at that and they go, yes, that is true. So now they're ready to go to the next part. Well, why are African American students who are struggling in a subject more likely to be the focus of disciplinary action in classes or blocks in which they are struggling academically and in the remaining classes blocks after? And that may require additional data. It might require surveys or empathy interviews. It might require looking at the same data that they've looked at, like referrals, for example, or maybe SST notes for different information. But it's very clear what they're looking for now. And they already know that they have significant data to support it. So they're not just looking at this happened to one student. They're looking that this happens to a group of students repeatedly. So we'll talk a little bit about the cause statements and validation. Now, remember at this point, you've looked at relationship and comparison. You have probably done some hypothesis questions, and you've gotten to your cause statements from those hypothesis questions as you've used the cycle of inquiry to find more and more data. Cause statement is just a way to capture the cause with its corresponding data. When you've done a hypothesis question and you start to use the cycle of inquiry and get data to answer those questions, the causes start to emerge. And you don't want to just capture the cause. You also want to capture the data that supports what you're looking at. For two reasons. One, it's much easier to hang on to than the full journey there. But two, you want to make sure that if you want to go back and look at it a little bit differently, you know what you looked at. And that's especially important when you're getting towards a root cause. Because you're going to want to be able to look back through that journey. If this is one of your root causes or the root cause, you're going to want to make sure that you know where to follow the steps to it. And validating causes is just doing that. It's checking that the cause is just to make sure that it's accurate and strong. You might find something that is clearly a cause and it only impacts 2 students. That's not going to really help you unless you are only a LEA of 5 people. So you want to make sure that you're looking at a cause that is impacting your target group, not that you don't do something about a cause for 1 or 2 students, but the plan needs to be based that's going to impact more than just 2 students. So the cause statements are going to be used to help you identify the root causes. In fact, in most cases, the cause statements that you find this way are going to become your root cause. And we'll talk more about how do you know a cause statement versus a root cause in a little bit. First, I want to talk about how do you validate causes. So you've investigated, you've hunted a cause, and you maybe have a few causes that you want to validate. You want to make sure that these are real causes. Well, there's a few ways you can do that. One is by looking at cause and effect data, and this is large scale. So if a significant number of students experience X, whatever X is, which seem to cause Y, to the point that you can predict it, the numbers themselves will help validate that there is a causal relationship. So for example, if I'm looking at attendance and I look at assignment grades, or maybe I'm even looking at semester grades or quarter grades, or I'm looking at step testing for reading or whatever I'm looking at. If I can start to see that, oh, somebody who has very low attendance, I can predict that they're also that they're going to have lower grades, for example. So if you can predict it by looking at X, that it's Y, and then you check that it's Y and it is Y, you probably have a causal relationship. And so just sheer numbers will help you do that. However, sometimes you don't have the benefit of that kind of large number data. And so in that case, you want to look at triangulating data. And that's if you have multiple sets that point to the same conclusion. When it does that, there's a better chance that it's accurate. And that's especially true if those sources are from different types of sources. So they're not all from attendance data. You also see it in the test scores, or you're looking at it from different, let me give you something else. Like you're looking at it from test scores, and you're looking at it from grades, and you're looking at it from maybe progress report comments. Maybe you're looking at from assignment or maybe step test, like interim kinds of work done, that you can see it in many cases, the same thing play out in many cases. And you're looking for multiple data sets, multiple ways of looking at that. And then comparison data. Okay, I like to call this two sides of a coin. So basically, if you have found that your target group of students have experienced X, again, whatever X is, then you might not be able to just see it enough just in that. So you want to look at the other side. Like what happened when students who are not in your target group experienced X? So you can start to see a pattern happen that is reversed when students who are not in your target group, you see a difference there. And that's where that comparison data really comes in handy. So you remember, those of you who were participating, and happened early on was you did data drill downs, and you used data drill down statements to kind of capture what you were finding. You also started to look for problems. You continued the data analysis and collection to identify the problem. And in doing so, you were ready to develop problem statements. When you develop problem statements, you continued by looking at relationship and comparison. And by doing that, you got lots of questions answered, and you were at the point where you started to look at hypothesis questions to lead you to causes. At the point you were finding some causes, you captured them with cause statements. And once you have your cause statements, you made sure that those cause statements were strong. You probably validated causes in a variety of different ways, whatever worked for those cause statements. And by validating, you either said, yeah, this is a cause, or you went back to the drawing board where you threw a cause out because it doesn't seem to hold water. And so once you are at the point of validating causes, you're ready to start looking at your root cause. And that's what we'll be talking about next. So root cause identification. First, we kind of need to look at the whole. Once you have cause statements, you're getting really close. And if you know that they are validated, and you know that you have a strong problem statement that they're connected to, you're getting really close. But it also can get confusing. So I want to make sure that you understand the difference between symptoms and problems and causes. So no root cause analysis. Webinar is complete without a tree metaphor. This is what is used to help explain root cause analysis. But basically, in this scenario, the leaves are symptoms or they're outcomes. And they're not negative or positive, right? They just are outcomes. They're just things that happen, symptoms of a problem or outcomes of a situation. And that might be what traditionally that's what you see, right? That's where we tend to, as educators, address the symptoms because that's what we're seeing. And that might be scores on reading assessments. Yeah, you see those scores, and that might be a symptom of a problem. Over-identification of white students for autism, that's a symptom. That's a situation, that's an outcome of a situation that you want to look at addressing. Or disruptive student behavior. It's an actual symptom. It's a leaf. Now the trunk of the tree is the problem, the actual problem or the situation. And so, for example, and by the way, sometimes the problem, you can't see the problem, you just see the leaves. Sometimes it's difficult to have a full view of the actual problem or situation. And in fact, right now, you may not have a clear view of the whole problem or situation. And so that's why you do data analysis, to try to understand and to try to get a better look at the parts that you can't see, and to try to look beyond the leaves into what is feeding those leaves. And that's going to be something like Hispanic students who are initial EL are falling behind in second and third grades. And that you did that from looking at data. And now you see, okay, this is the problem. This is what's causing those low scores. There's a relationship there. This is the situation we want to address. Or maybe the situation is white students with a doctor's diagnosis of autism are 5 times more likely to be assessed for special education by parent request, declining consideration of the option of a 504 plan. So that might be a situation you're having where you're not even able to use the SST process to see if anything else is might be helpful prior to special education, because parents are requesting assessment. And by law, they have a right to request assessment, and you must assess. So that might be a situation that is causing a lot more white students to be identified as autism in special education at your LEA. Might be 4th and 5th grade African-American students are frequently suspended, causing a negative cycle of missed school, learning struggles, acting out to avoid shame, and more disciplinary action. That might be what you found in your data that is going on and is causing some of the misbehavior. I know if students can't read, for example, they're not going to sit there and show everybody how poorly they read. They're going to get out of it somehow. So that might be the situation that you've discovered that you want to address. Now, the roots are the cause of the problem. They're what made the problem occur, or they were a significant part of that problem or the situation existing. So that might be lack of support or understanding about the needs of EL students who are learning to read. That might be a root cause of what is going on with EL students and reading scores. And you found that through data. You didn't just make that up or intuit it. You found that because data led you there, and you verified it, you validated it by looking at the data sources that you need to be able to validate it and know that that's a thing. Or maybe it's 504 plans are not well understood and are believed by parents to be less desirable. That might be the reason, the cause of having a lot of students who are identified as autism go into special education when they might not need that level of support. They might function very well on a 504 plan, but that wasn't tried because it's not well understood. It's not something that people know about or trust. Or it might be a lack of behavior support in the upper elementary. I mean, maybe you find that, wow, you have great behavior support all the way up to 3rd grade, and then it falls off in 4th grade and it's kind of gone in 5th grade. Maybe you found that to be the case and you found that from data, and that could be the cause of the situation you're experiencing and the symptoms that you see. So it's relationships between these things. They're connected all the way to what you're seeing. Now, it'd be easy if there was just one root, but when you're looking at a root system, you're looking at many roots. So there's probably, you have a situation and you probably don't just have one cause. You probably have multiple causes. And just like if you think about a root ball, like a root system of a tree, it's very elaborate. You don't just have that one tap root. You have many roots off of that. Some are just hair size, and that's not the root you want to address. So let's talk about taproot, okay? You want to find that taproot. Since they're all strengths and sizes, you want to find the main one. And that taproot is the large, central, and dominant root from which other roots sprout, typically laterally. Sometimes that taproot will grow down and split into two, but all the other roots come off of it. And you see it as that one main root. So that's understanding our metaphor. How does that work in terms of root causes? Well, there may be other causes around the root cause, which may or may not relate. I mean, remember, every kid is an individual. You might find one hair that relates to one kid. So when you're looking at this complex system of causes, and this is also where when you've patched a system a lot, you get sort of additional causes aren't usually root causes, but they make it more complex. So you want to make sure that you have got the biggest root you can find, the biggest one that's going to impact the most kids or have the biggest impact on those kids. And realizing that you might have other related causes that you're trying to understand the relationship to. And that's part of what makes root cause analysis difficult, is once you get to this point, there's not just an answer. You have to kind of sort through and untangle the relationship between things. And so let's talk about the criteria for the SIM process of root causes. So in order for a statement to be a root cause and it to be really useful to you, it must be the major cause of the problem and not something superficial. So it needs to be a significant contributor. There might be other smaller causes, and they might even be causes that relate to that main cause. But you want to, this isn't an exercise in grabbing the easiest. This is an exercise in identifying the most impactful. And you want to make sure that it's based on and supported by data, not somebody's idea. It's really based on what you saw when you were, digging. You were being that archaeologist trying to find more information, trying to unearth those bones. So that's where you want to find your causes, especially your root cause. this is kind of what separates some things where some people get stuck here, okay? Um, it's got to be solvable and under the control of the organization that is experiencing the problem. We can all find a root cause in multi-generational poverty. I don't know anybody's LEA makeup, but anybody who has students who have low economic status and who are from generations of poverty, I can almost guarantee that that multi-generational poverty is a contributor to challenges that they're experiencing. But that is not solvable and under the control of the organization. And it doesn't do anybody any good to just focus on that. So what you need to do is find that cause that is under the control of the organization that is experiencing the problem. And I mean organization that has experienced the problem is that it has to be under the control of the school or the grade level. Wherever you found that problem situated, the participants in that at that particular school or that particular grade, they need to be able to have some control over what they're doing. And that's what I mean by under the control of the organization. It needs to be identified as having a substantial impact on the target group of students. That seems obvious probably, but it's very easy when you're doing in-depth data analysis that you can't underestimate the ability to get lost in the data. And sometimes you end up finding what is a great issue that you're addressing, but it doesn't completely really impact that target group. And so the SIM plan is really focused on addressing that disproportionality indicator. So you need to make sure that you're addressing that target group of students. Otherwise, or it's addressing the students that are everyone but that target group, so that you're supporting that target group. Otherwise, you're solving a different problem. And I'm not saying don't solve it, but for the SIM process, you need to be focused on your target group of students. You need to focus on systematic issues. Okay, so this kind of comes in, I mean, it's kind of obvious that if you're not blaming or holding people responsible for things that they can't control, you're not focusing on people. It's not the student's fault. It's not the system's fault. It's not CDE's fault. You're not going to change the system. You're going to focus on the issue that is in the system that you can impact. And if it doesn't focus on that, then it has to allow for a plan that can focus on systematic issues. So that's how you're going to identify what root cause you're going to really prioritize and work on. Now, I've kind of alluded to this a few times, but this is usually the point is, okay, you've done all this work and you think you have a root cause. How do you know if it is a root cause? Well, the short answer is that you don't know for sure until the problem is resolved. You've put together a plan, you've resolved that cause, and now the problem is resolved. And you say, yep, that was the root cause. And so really what you're looking for is your best educated guess. And that's why you need to be very data driven in this. You've already addressed certain things from what you're understanding. Now you're looking at from the data specifically, so that you are closer to what is going to make a difference. And one of those ways that you can use to help you find that is the inquiry cycles. If you are being very disciplined and you stick with the inquiry cycles, it will uncover your causes. And if you look beneath those causes and keep asking those questions, your root causes will come to the fore and you'll be able to identify those. There's also some exercises to use. One is the 5 whys, and that's a very simple one. When you have a cause, ask yourself why, and keep asking yourself why, making sure that your answer is based on data that you can prove it basically, and you will get to that root cause. If you have a very complicated system, or that complicated root ball basically, or you have a lot of patches that are hard to figure out, a lot of moving pieces maybe, then probably you want to look at doing a fishbone diagram. It allows for much more complexity in the system, and it can help you identify your root causes by sort of organizing things. And that's something that ED&D could help you with if you aren't sure what to do for a fishbone diagram. And there are other protocols for identification of root cause. You're welcome to use a protocol that works for your LEA. We've just found that the 5 whys and the fishbone diagram tend to be the ones that are most useful for LEAs, and they tend to get positive results when they use that. Now, once you're at that point where, yeah, I think I have my root cause, you want to review the characteristics of a good root cause. That's the things I just got over. You want to make sure that it's solvable. You want to make sure that it is, relating to your target group of students. So double check that to make sure before fully landing on the root cause or root causes. Now, this is the point where you might be saying, oh my gosh, I don't know. How am I going to go from I'm not even done with my data drill down. I don't know how I'm going to get the data drill down to a problem statement, and you want me to get to causes, and it's too much. If you're feeling that way, or you're just feeling like, I don't know where to start, ED&D has a mini lesson on August 24th, and they'll put the link in the chat probably a number of times throughout the end of this presentation. But I encourage you to sign up for that. And if there's a need, it's like, I would love to do that, but I can't make the 8/24 date. Let them know, because they are open if there's a need to add more dates. So if it's something that is useful, apparently the last one went really well, where LEAs were able to help other LEAs, so which is ideal. That's great. So if you are interested in that, by all means, grab that. There's also, if you just really want to learn, well, how do I do this fishbone diagram again? You really want to know that. They've created a little video that can help you. It's sort of your own training on how to do a fishbone diagram, and they will put the link in the chat for that as well. So you can avail yourselves of those two opportunities. And I encourage you, if you think that that will be helpful, I encourage you to do so. So I just want to step back again. Where we are is you develop cause statements, and you validated causes. I know this is something you're going to do, but this is all the process. And then maybe you used 5 whys or fishbone diagram or some other protocol to identify what that main cause is. And you use the qualities of a good root cause to make sure that you have a root cause that's going to work for your LEA and work for the plan ahead. So you've identified that root cause, and there can be more than one root cause, but ideally keep it as few as possible for a lot of reasons. If you have too many root causes, chances are you've broken it up too small and they relate. So just look to see if there's a relationship there, that maybe it's just a little bit more complex than you made it. And so the next step will be prioritization of root causes. And our next webinars will be about prioritization, theory of action, and I never remember the third thing, but 3 things together of the next 3. Now, those are optional. But if you have many root causes that you don't really know where to go with, I encourage you to do that, to get some help with that. So before we finish things up, I want to talk about the roadblocks and the detours, and hopefully you can prepare for them or maybe even avoid them altogether. These are the things I mentioned in the beginning that I really want to spend some time looking at. First is scale, and I kind of already talked about what scale is, but basically you want to make sure that you're not basing your entire root cause on one student. It might be very true for that one student, but if that isn't true for all of your students in that target, then you're going to improve things for one student with this whole plan. So you want to make sure that's the scale. Sometimes you get a quote from like an empathy interview, or maybe you find a non-compliance in your policy, practices, and procedure review that it just rings true. And so rather than throw that away and just say, oh, that's just one, I can't really use it, we're going to talk about how do you address scale, so to find out if it is something that you can use, because it might be a tip of an iceberg. The other is mistaking correlation for causation. And this has to do when there's two variables and they're assumed to have a causal relationship, but they really are just correlative. So for example, you might have brown eyes and brown hair. Brown eyes don't cause brown hair. Brown hair doesn't cause brown eyes, but there's a correlation. But you wouldn't want to base your plan on something that doesn't really cause what it is that you're looking at. And then the third thing we're going to talk about is mindset challenges like solutionitis. And basically, this is different ways of thinking or of approaching data analysis that can potentially undermine the process and make the outcome pretty precarious, because it's not based on solid ground. It's based on faulty information in one way or another. And so we want to make sure that we look at that and are aware of how to address it. So let's first talk about scale. Like when we're talking about scale, we're looking at things like, an empathy interview versus an all school survey results, right? A school-wide survey is going to give you lots of information from lots of different people. An empathy interview is going to give you information about one person. And that doesn't mean that that information isn't good. But you can't just assume that the piece of information you have is correct. If a student comes and tells you something's going on, you're going to want to investigate it before acting. So similarly, you want to do something with that one piece, which, as I say, it might be the tip of the iceberg. It might be that, oh, wow, you're at the beginning of something that really, once you uncover it, will be significant. But since an empathy interview doesn't have equal weight with something that is large, much larger, you need to do something with that. You can't just use it raw as the reason that, what becomes your cause. So what do? First of all, you consider what can you do to strengthen this information. And by strengthen, it typically means more numbers, right? So you're going to ask yourself, what can I look at that will help support what I see in this quote or file review? Now, if it's a file review, you looked at 10 different IEPs. Most of you have more than 10 IEPs in your LEA. And so it's a little bit obvious that you could look at other IEPs, even that were not selected in that particular file review. So that's one way that you can increase the numbers. But what about a quote, a really good quote from a parent maybe? Well, then there's other places that you can look. You can look at maybe a climate survey can give you that information, maybe something that has already occurred. Or you can look at, if I get an empathy interview, depends on the piece of information, but let's say I get a piece of information about teachers' relationship with students, that I don't know, teachers don't answer the questions of students. Well, you can ask teachers what they do in certain circumstances and do a little survey and find out. Or you can ask students what happens when they're asked certain questions and do a little survey or a focus group there. Or you could do an observation and see what happens in certain circumstances, since you're in session now. So what you want to do is look to see is what you're looking at, what you think is significant, is it repeatable? Is it something that happens to more than one student or happens about more than one situation? And is this something that relates to my target group? When you get that additional data, whatever that data is, then you start to even it out. And when you even it out, then the combination of that other data and that empathy interview, you can use that because you basically have validated it, really. And so when you're looking at scale and you realize that there's an issue, it doesn't mean that you have to throw it out. You need to stop. Remember that there's strength in numbers. Just look for more. The more you can find, the greater the weight the data holds. If you can't find more of the same, look for more of the opposite. This is the thing that I call two sides of a coin. So if you can't find X, right, then you look for non-X. So the example I like to use is kind of silly, but if I can't show that right-handed people are taller, I'm going to try to show that left-handed people are shorter. I'm looking for the same thing by looking at the opposite, and that increases numbers. And when you find the way to strengthen that one, then you can get back on your trail. You can actually just go around and keep going because you've addressed scale. But that's one of the things that will slow you down, and you have to address to make sure that you're looking at accurate information that is as strong as you need it to be in case this leads you to a cause. So what about that causal versus correlative? So a correlation is like that brown eyes and brown hair. It's a mutual relationship or a connection, but it doesn't imply causation. So in this case, brown eyes and brown hair is caused by something else. They don't cause each other. And so there's a correlation there. You do not want to put all of it on something that is just correlative to the issue, because it's not going to help change the situation at all. So causation is a relationship between two variables in which one is a substantial factor in determining the other. So it doesn't have to be all of it, but it's a large part of it. And these causation is only one type of relationship that could exist. So when you're looking for causation, realize that just because you see a relationship doesn't mean it's a causal relationship. So you want to find those causal relationships. What do you do? Well, one thing is to make sure you're validating your causes and use triangulation. In other words, use multiple data sources to point to the same thing. The more data sources that point to the same thing, the stronger the conclusion is. And it should point you in the right direction. If you can't find data that supports this, and you just have this belief, then you might not have a causal relationship here. And you really need to look to see, or you might need to look at, to develop more data if you really think that this is something that you want to pursue. But it might be something that you need to let go of and look elsewhere. So when you approach this and you see that, oh, I don't know that this is causal, you need to take the time. And once you've taken the time to address it, to resolve it, then you can go around it and get back on the road to getting your root cause analysis identified. Now, remember, I talked about mindsets. So there's a couple, there's a bunch of mindsets, but these tend to what come up in root cause analysis at schools. So one is solutionitis. And solutionitis is the tendency to jump quickly to a solution before fully understanding the actual problem to be solved. And by fully understanding, we mean data analyzed. We mean by looking at the data that demonstrates to us what the problem is to be solved. So the thing is that solutionitis is a good thing in education in most cases. Many of us have found, me included, great success at the ability to look at a problem, identify as much as I can, and using my intuition to identify what the next step should be or what the solution is, and act, has brought me success in education. And so what it is that we really want to make sure is that in this case, we want to turn down that voice. I'll tell you from my own experience, solutions will still come to you. You will still say, oh, I think I know what that is. Oh, I think I know what causes that. And you might be right, but you have to be disciplined to say, I'm going to look back at the data. I'm going to take my time. I'm going to use that patience and determination. I'm going to ask my question. I'm going to find more data, and I'm going to let the data lead me. I'm not going to lead the data. So even if you think you know, you want to let the data lead you there. How solutionitis can become really negative is when you allow those solutions to replace data. And, maybe you're right, maybe you're not. Those aren't good odds. You want to really go with what it is that you're seeing to be the problem. You want to prove it to yourself, okay? So you want to watch for solutionitis. And confirmation bias is also can be very problematic. And confirmation bias can actually, if it is allowed to take over, it could change your whole process, change your whole analysis completely. Now, so what confirmation bias is the tendency to gather information to show or confirm what you already believe. And so this is where you already have a belief and you gather data to support that belief, to prove that. So you're still doing data analysis, right? But you don't have that open mind to see what's there. You're only looking at what supports what you already think. And that is not going to lead you to anything but your own bias. And sometimes that can work, and sometimes that can be very negative. So let me give you a possible scenario. If I think the real issue is that we need to make sure that we have an EL teacher in the 4th grade that is designated to the 4th and 5th grade. If I think that's the solution, and I'm only looking for solutions that I'm only looking for data that support that solution, I'm going to miss a lot of things. Let's take one that's even worse. Let's say that I believe that African American students behave the way they do because of their home life. Okay, let's say that's a belief I have, and I'm on your team, and I am only looking for data that supports that. Well, I will completely undermine the open ability of the team to look at what's there. And I am actually making the situation worse through my bias. Really important to identify these things, really important to see when they're happening, and really important to take a step back. The third, I think a lot of us can admit to, we often skip validation. And validation is like checking your work, okay? If you have to write an essay and you've looked over it a bunch of times and you just don't want to reread it one more time, you want to believe it's good and you submit it at that point, well, you might miss some mistakes. You might think what you see is there is true, but it may not be as you actually, that the way it actually needs to be. So validation is similar. And that when you skip validation, you are taking every piece of data as if it is truth, assuming it's accurate and applicable to all. If you don't validate that this has impact, that it's a real situation for your target group, then you're missing an opportunity to correct things that might lead you to having a plan that is, or have identified a cause that doesn't really relate to what it is that you want to work on. Now, these challenges can show up at any time in the process, and they can just, drop the floor right out of what you're working. You might have already encountered them. But as you get closer and closer to identifying root causes, you often that's when some of these come up more. And by doing the things that you do with your sim team, by setting the standards of, we're going to approach this through inquiry and data analysis, and we're going to have an open, curious, objective approach. And we're all going to help each other do that. That's the only way that you can avoid these, or that you've set up to avoid these things. But what happens if you come up to it and there it is? Here, it's right there. Now, what do you do? Well, the response is similar to all. So the best way is to back up, stop the process, go back to the data, and ask open, objective questions to get you back into looking at the data. And you want to try to have that open and curious mind. And as far as the skipping validation part, you do want a small amount of healthy skepticism that makes you want to double check everything. That combination is what will be successful. Always just go back to questions, back to the data. So you back up and you go a different way. So let me go back to our why. We all want what's best for our students. Basically, disproportionality is a set of elements that point to a possible set of issues that are not identified anywhere else. And through the process of root cause analysis, you can find and address core issues. You can find things that are happening that are impacting a particular group of students' education. And you have the opportunity now, whether you find, oh, wow, we need more training, or there's inconsistent support, or maybe there's bias, or whatever you find, it's the root cause analysis that is the point that you begin to rectify the situation. And it's your opportunity to begin to address equity, fairness, and inclusion at your school. Whether you caused it or not, it's your opportunity to look at what's there and address it. So dig deep and reflect honestly, and happy root cause hunting. So I want to give you again a few resources. Need help with root cause analysis? In the chat, you'll find a link where you could sign up for the ED&D root cause analysis mini lesson, which will happen on 8/24. That's going to help you with where you are, going through to finish up your data drill down, move to a problem statement, and possible causes, where you go from there, and especially if you're not really sure, be really, really helpful. And if you want that what's a fishbone diagram video from ED&D, that link is in the chat as well. And I mentioned this early on, but CDE has put together a Padlet for the SIM process, and that includes the resources for your SIM team, some rubrics. It includes some information on how you identify who your consultant is. There's some general resources there. That is available to you, and that link is in the chat. It was sent to you, I don't know when now. It was sent to you towards the end of step one. So also, if you would like to go back to look at the SIM process, CDE has a website. That's the website you looked at in the very beginning. You have that available. It explains a little bit more about the SIM process and identification. And then finally, what I have here is the State Performance Plan Technical Assistance Project, or SPP TAP. It's basically NAPA that has, for a very long time, worked on significant disproportionality. And you see, in the past, in disproportionality, you didn't write a plan until you were significantly disproportionate. And that's your third year that you are out in a specific indicator for a specific group. So they have created quite a few resources that relate to disproportionality. And so, and if you want to understand a little bit more about significant disproportionality, there's information on that too. So that is a link to that website, to their website. So we're at the point where if you have questions, and if anybody, I think Erin has watched the chat, what questions might have come up that didn't get answered?
I don't see any questions right now, Lynn, but we did add a second root cause work session for folks on the 15th of September as well. We had a request to have one after our next and final root cause session with you. So we added that.
Great.
So that link is in the chat, but no questions right now. Let me see the Padlet though.
Oh, maybe Tammy, could you put that link in the chat again for people?
Perfect. There we go.
Thank you so much.
No problem. I was just waiting.
Thanks. If you are at the point where you really need some, one-on-one love from ED&D, you might have a situation that you feel like you really need some coaching support on. Please feel free to schedule a coaching session. This is Adrienne Bautista's email. That's how you schedule a coaching session. If you have questions about this and you want to reach out to your FMTA consultant for help on this, you can always contact your FMTA. Now, this is in the Padlet, but I'll go over it quickly here. Basically, FMTA consultants are divided by region where your SELPA is. So if you're El Dorado SELPA, you're in region 3 because that's where El Dorado is. But you look, if you're not in El Dorado SELPA, you're in a different SELPA, you look at where your SELPA is located, what county it's in, and there's a region number where that have multiple counties in them. You use that region number to find how we are assigned. And our assignments, you will see that under region 3, which was the example I gave, there are 3 different consultants. That's because it's so big because of all the charter schools. So just email any one of us and we will find you the right person, I promise. You don't have to figure that out. But if you want to email your consultant and ask for some support, we are ready and available to provide that. And if there's something that you need from your ED&D team contacts, they are here and you can use them at will. Otherwise, if you really want a coaching session, then you want to focus with Adrienne because she manages that schedule. And I want to acknowledge that the project is funded by CDE and a partnership with San Diego South County SELPA, California Collaborative for Education Excellence, and CDE. And we can wait for a little bit in case anybody has some questions that they want to ask going off mute. But I want to thank you for your time, your attention, and your patience with my voice. It actually wasn't as bad as I was worried it would be. So thank you for a long afternoon. So appreciate your time.